You're listening to Heroes of Healthcare, a series about the bold, selfless, and innovative individuals who are serving our communities with compassion and care. This episode is sponsored by Jackson & Coker Locum Tenens. If you are seeking interim physician or advanced practitioner coverage at your facility, or are a practitioner who is looking for more work-life balance, visit them at jacksonandcoker.com to learn more about their services. Now, let's get into the show.
Welcome to the Heroes of Healthcare podcast. I'm your host, Tim Fisher. Today's guest is Dr. Greg Charlop. Greg's a regular on ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, and Forbes, and is the founder of the Physician Wellness Project. He's a recognized wellness and burnout expert who is passionate about helping fellow professionals and physicians. We are very excited to have Greg join the show today. Dr. Charlop, welcome to Heroes of Healthcare. We're glad to have you on today.
Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
You bet. So let's start. You have a great background, and I want to talk about your background. But let's start with, can you share with the listeners where you grew up and kind of what was the decision-making when you decided to be a doctor?
Sure, happy to. So I grew up in Southern California, in Orange County. And back then it was kind of more famous. There was the OC. There was a show that was on. So whenever I'd say Orange County, people knew. I wonder how many of your listeners remember that place now. But I grew up in Orange County, and I went to school at UCLA for college, med school, went to Stanford for residency, went back down to LA for fellowship, pediatric anesthesia fellowship, kind of moved up and down the state of California. So I'm really a Californian, I guess, by background. But don't hold that against me. And what was my reason for going into medicine? Well, truthfully, a lot of it was I always liked science. I think this is true for a lot of doctors. I always liked science. And at the time, there weren't too many great ways of doing stuff with science, if you wanted to, other than, maybe being a professor or something like that. And truthfully, I just don't have the patience for that type of thing. So that was never really an option for me. Even research, I think research is great, but I just don't have the patience for that. So medicine kind of made sense to me. It kind of moved faster. You were helping people, which I enjoyed. It was applied science, which I liked. So it kind of just made sense as a good fit.
That's great. So at what age do you think you made the decision, hey, I want to be a physician?
Well, I remember my original plan was to be a rock star, and unfortunately that didn't work out. Then my plan was to be governor of California, and thank God that didn't work out. So I went down a few items on my list, but I would say the physician, I probably decided second or third year of college, maybe second year of college.
Okay.
I was also considering law. I liked law. Because I like to argue with people, but the problem with law is I thought there was too much reading. I didn't think I'd handle all the reading, so I figured that probably wouldn't work for me.
Well, the great thing about this podcast is, as a physician, a very accomplished physician, we think you are a rock star. So you're actually accomplishing both of those.
We need to hang out more often.
Exactly. So you're going to college, and you decide you're going to med school. A lot of our listeners are in healthcare, but some are not. Can you walk through, how that works? Because not everybody understands. You go to college, you graduate from college, then you go to med school, and then you have residency. Can you kind of walk through that process just for people that don't understand what it takes to be a physician?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And, this actually plays a role, I think, in what we're going to talk about later, which is I sort of call it the runway problem, which is that the path to become a physician is so long. But, as you mentioned, you go to college and you have to do well in college because you need to get into medical school. And medical school is hard. And you have to get good grades, and you have to do a lot of extracurriculars and a lot of projects. And then if you do all that stuff and you're lucky and you interview well, then you can get into medical school. And, I remember at the time I went to UCLA, I think about half of the biology type majors wanted to go to medical school. Like they went to college, like half of this enormous group of people went in with the intention of going to medical school. So there's this tremendous weeding process there. And then after medical school, which is hard, you work nights, you work weekends, you're paying for it to be there. It's hard. People think, well, you're done. But then you've got, as you said, you've got residency afterwards. And the length of that depends on what field you go into. So typically it's anywhere between 3 and 7 years after medical school. And that, believe it or not, you even work harder for than in medical school. Back in my day, I hate to say that, it makes me sound old, but back in my day, you might be working 90, 100 hours a week as a resident. I remember I think my record shift length was close to 40 hours or something like that once. So it's long. And then some people after that will then do something called a fellowship, which is additional sort of specialization after residency. And depending on what you do, those are usually maybe 1 or 2 years, 3 at the most.
So you go to college. I went to college for 4 years, and I was tired of going to class after those 4 years. You go to college for 4 years, and it's high pressure because you have to achieve well and you have to interview well to get into med school. You go to med school for 4 years, right?
Right.
Roughly. And then your fellowship is 3 to 7 years on top of that, depending on the specialty that you're in, or your residency is 3 to 7 years. And then you could have a fellowship on top of that. So by the time you get through that, you could be over 30 years old, right?
Right. And that's assuming you do it directly.
Right.
Some people don't. Some people, the minority of people, but some people, they did another career and they changed into medical school for whatever reason, or they took time off, or they did research. Some people do something called an MD PhD program where they actually get both an MD and a PhD together, but that takes an extra few years.
So many of our listeners know but some don't, that there is a shortage of physicians in the United States. So there's a shortage of physicians in the United States. A lot of physicians are entering an age or point in their career where they're thinking about retiring. There's also a lot of physicians who are burned out or their well-being is not good. And then it's very difficult to become a physician, and people aren't as interested in being a physician as they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. So you add all that up, and there's a crisis in the United States at this point. So can you share a little bit about how you were, obviously, you were practicing as a physician, but then you decided to take a little different career choice?
Yeah, I mean, I did give up the rock star things. I knew that wasn't going to work out. But, I always had these other interests. I always loved business. I found that I loved real estate. I love philanthropy and charitable projects. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I like to do. I think I'm just sort of a creative person. So, when you're in, and this is something they don't really tell you, but medical school to some degree attracts creative people because I call it the medical school paradox, which is that they don't want people that are just good at school. They want people that have other interests, that are excellent violinists, or who have started a charity clinic in Guatemala, or have started their own business already or something. People that have done other things that are kind of multifaceted. But then when you get into medical school, you don't have time to do any of that because it's so busy. And, we expect that. You understand that. But then you go to residency, which you may not have really thought about, but you definitely don't have time to do any of that stuff then. And now finally, you're just coming into practice. And typically early on in your work, you're working a lot, you're on call, you're working nights, you're working weekends. Perhaps you're just getting married, or maybe just having kids. You might be just getting your first house. As you mentioned, in your early 30s, you probably have a big medical school debt from student loans. And so even in your early 30s, it's not so easy to do other things. And so the problem is you're getting all these people and they've got all these interests, but then it makes it very difficult. The system makes it very difficult to actually act on them. And so in my case, I liked all this other stuff, but I didn't really have time for it. And I shelved it. And then I remember I started dabbling in real estate. That was one thing I was able to do once I started practicing. I bought some homes. This is kind of during that 2006 to 8 financial crisis. You remember that? So prices were low then. I was able to, to mess around a little bit in the real estate market because I could afford it at that time. And that got me interested. And I did a number of real estate things. As odd as it sounds, I wrote a book about real estate technology, and I even held some conferences about real estate. I created them, as odd as that sounds for a physician to do. But I like doing other things, but I was limited because the hospital where I worked, the medical center, they don't allow you to do things that use your medical license that isn't with them. So the real estate stuff was okay, but just about everything else was off limits. And so, that was a problem for me. And I think it's a problem for a lot of people that want to do other things, even just as a side gig or a hobby.
Absolutely. You and I, you talked a little bit about just having the freedom because being a physician attracts people who are creative thinkers and think outside the box and have a lot of diverse interest. But speak a little bit about how you lose some freedom in doing that and becoming I don't want to say becoming part of the system, but you lose some of that creative freedom.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is time. In medical school and residency, you just don't have time to really hardly do anything else. I mean, in my view, it's critical that you exercise. So I did make time for that. And, every now and then you might go out, go out to dinner or something. If you're lucky, maybe you have a few dates, but that's really about it. And if you're someone who's already married or already have kids, that definitely would consume whatever free time you had. So if you have some other hobby or side interest, there's definitely no way you could do that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very difficult to become a physician, and then you get out and you start practicing, and you're helping people. Obviously, you have a passion for helping people. And at one point, you might speak to this a little bit, you decided to try this thing called Locum Tenens. Can you share maybe the why behind it before you share your experience?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I'm a pediatric anesthesiologist. So if you're a doctor listening to this, you're probably thinking, oh, he's got a cushy life already. So you're probably already thinking I'm pampered. But, we had call, nights, weekends, all that stuff. And, I had kids at this point once I was working. So I cut my work hours down. I started going part-time. I really went part-time, like to 60% time, which is almost unheard of where I was. But I still had call on weekends and nights. I didn't want to do it. So I ended up leaving, which was very unusual. Very unusual. And I left in part because I wanted to reclaim control of my schedule. I wanted to work when I wanted, but I wanted to be off when the kids were off school. And I still remember, my kids were little, they would love to go out for Halloween. Everybody loves to get dressed up for Halloween. I mean, I always liked Halloween. My kids loved it. And I still remember my kids were getting dressed up to go out and do this in their costumes. And I couldn't go with them because I was working. And I just didn't like that. I didn't want to give that up. So I wanted to be able to have more control over my schedule. And then the other thing, like we talked about, is I wanted to be able to do other things. So I left my regular job at the hospital, which was sort of almost unheard of at the time. And I switched and I started doing just locum tenens and per diem work.
So how did you find that? I mean, when your first locums assignment, what was that like?
So I have to tell you. So we were in the Bay Area and we moved to LA. And I thought, well, LA is going to be so much cheaper. It's going to be great. But it wasn't. It was expensive. And so my dream of just working a little bit was hard. And then it turns out the per diem stuff, which is what I started with first, there were fewer jobs there of the kind of job I wanted than I expected as per diem. And I was a little bit worried. Rent was high. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. It was one of the first times in recent memory that I was kind of worried about my financial situation because I had this high rent. We had a lot of costs for moving. I gave up all of my benefits because I left my job. So I was paying for health insurance, life insurance, disability, malpractice, like you name it. I was paying. It was expensive. And I wasn't working that much. So then I found this locum tenens job and it was like a lifesaver for me because it paid well. I had as much work doing it as I wanted. I didn't want to do this, but if I wanted to go there just about every week, they would have taken me. So I had all the work that I wanted to do. And I loved the job. I loved the place I was going to. The people were so nice. They were really glad I was there because if I hadn't been there, they couldn't take their vacations and they would be working even more. So they welcomed me. And truth be told, it removed that financial stress that I truthfully really was feeling at the time. So I was very glad to have that locum tenens job, my first one.
I bet. So the first one sounds like it went well. You were appreciated. You had the freedom to work when you wanted to work. You had the freedom to spend time with your family when you wanted to spend time with your family. At what point did you decide, hey, I'm going to do this full time?
Well, so once I left the hospital job, I said I would never do that again. And I was nervous at first, and I'll be honest, I second guessed myself early on, like I said, when I wasn't getting that many gigs right away and I had all these costs. So I wondered, did I make a mistake? Don't tell my parents that because they, they didn't want me to leave the job. But once I got the Locum Tenens job, from then on, I didn't look back. I said, this was the right thing to do. There's no reason to do anything else. We all have our priorities, but for me, I'm just not a night person. That's just, I mean, even in high school, I remember if I had a test or something important, I would go to bed at like 7 or 8 o'clock and I'd get up at like 4. I was the only person I knew who did it. I'm just not a night person. We all have our thing. So I just knew I didn't want to be on call anymore. And that's just like a bright line. And any regular hospital job in my field, I would have to be. That's just the way it is. And so, once I did the Locum Tenens job, and I realized I could control my schedule and I wouldn't have to work nights, that was it. Like I knew I would never go back. And I haven't. And this is back in 2018, 2019.
I mean, I don't have to tell you, but burnout is a real problem right now and has been for a while for physicians in our country. And the opportunity to take control of your life obviously has worked very well for you. And then you wrote a couple books. You started the Physician Wellness Project. Can you talk about maybe the impetus for starting the Physician Wellness Project? How did that work?
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, and I don't think I even understood this at the time. It took reflecting afterwards to appreciate it, but I think I was getting burnt out. It's not just the call, the nights. I mean, that was part of it, but the lack of control. And, I think, and a lot of people feel this way. I worked at a place for a long time, the same place. Eventually, there's politics and there's infighting. And this is a great organization. I liked them. And I think if you came to me and said, hey, would you work there? I would say yes. So I'm not criticizing the place. It's just any place where you work the same place for a while. There's politics, there's infighting, there's this and that. As I mentioned, I couldn't do the creative stuff I wanted to do. So I felt burned out. And seeing my kids go Halloween trick-or-treat, everybody's got their own thing that pushes you over the edge. But seeing my kids go trick-or-treating without me, I was burnt out. And I see a lot of people, I've worked with a lot of doctors who are burnt out for various reasons. It could be that they're overworked. They're just doing too many hours. A common one is what we talked about, that they're creative people, but they can't do their creative things. A lot of people feel moral injury, which is that they went into healthcare for a noble purpose. Like maybe they wanted to help anyone who needed help, for example. But then they found out in practice that they couldn't, either because there was some issue with the administration or, some rule from the hospital or lack of resources or whatever. And people suffer this moral injury because they're not able to do what they feel was the morally right thing to do, which is what drove them in. And that burns a lot of people out. So there's a lot of reasons why people are burnt out. And I think a big one, you actually hinted at this earlier, which is, back in my day when I was considering medicine, there were really only a few legitimate options for someone who wants to do kind of an aggressive career, if you want to call it that. There was medicine, there was law, and there was sort of like finance consulting stuff. Now there's a million things. There's startups all the time. There's AI. There's this, there's that. I mean, the opportunities are endless. So I think a lot of doctors are asking themselves, why did I put myself in this position when my friends who are no smarter than I am and have worked less than I am have a much better life than I do? It can be difficult to see that.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of good, obviously, and sometimes the good is not always shared in the media or whatever. But there's a lot of good, but there's also a lot of challenges to our healthcare system. If you had a magic wand and you could solve one thing in our healthcare system, I'm going to put you on the spot here. If you had a magic wand and you could solve one issue that's an obvious issue that would make a tremendous impact, what do you think that would be?
I would focus more on preventative care, particularly nutrition. It's shocking how, I know this is totally off topic from what we were discussing, but it's shocking how little both doctors and patients understand about nutrition. They hardly talk about it during medical school or residency. People don't really know it. And so they're coming to you and they're suffering from a lot of diseases and illnesses that could have been avoided had there been a better understanding of nutrition. And so I wish that this were emphasized more in society, both in college and medical school, but even just throughout the educational system. People don't know what to do. And then they Google things and you get a million different answers. It's hard to know what to trust or what not to trust. And I think that's what's contributing to obesity and heart disease and diabetes and everything else.
So switching back to being a physician, we have a lot of physicians that listen to this podcast. Can you share a little bit about the physician wellness project that you have started? If someone's interested in learning more about that, how would they learn more?
Sure. So the Physician Wellness Project, it actually started originally as a book. And so that book is available. It's available as a paperback, as an ebook, and even as an audiobook. You can get it from anywhere you would buy books online, from Amazon to Walmart. The audiobook you can get from Audible or Spotify. So that's easy to get. If people want to learn more about it directly, they can find me on LinkedIn or on my website, GregoryCharlopMD.com, GregoryCharlopMD.com. But the genesis of it is that I've seen a lot of doctors who are burnt out, and I would like to offer a way that you could hopefully stay within medicine, but be happier and not feel burnt out and have time to do the other creative things you want to do, have time to exercise, enjoy time with your family, time for your hobbies. And I think one of the big components of what I do is advocate people do locum tenens. And usually what I do is I'll first have people go speak to a wealth advisor, which I think is important to do because you want to know where you stand. A lot of doctors just, they're not really that into money. You want it, but you don't know how much you need. So I always recommend people speak to a wealth advisor first, an independent one, not one who's trying to get you to buy something. So you know where to stand, because it might be that given your situation, if you work a week, a month, that's all you need to do. So if you find that out, how great is it to know that? And then you could, as an example, take a locum tenens job, work a week, a month, and then spend those other 3 weeks in Italy, if that's what you want to do, or spend that time with your grandkids. And the same is true for people that are thinking of retiring. I have a lot of near retirees, if you want to call them that they don't really want to do their jobs anymore that they're doing, but they don't want to sit around watching TV either. And so I think, again, locum tenens or per diem or things like that are a great opportunity where you could still do stuff. You're still keeping your mind active, but you're not, there 2 a.m. on a Saturday, which you probably don't want to be doing anymore.
Absolutely. And it sounds like it's worked very well for you. And as you're advocating and helping other physicians, it's something that you've lived out yourself, which I think is truly valuable to people who are looking for that in their lives, because there are a lot of people that are burned out right now. We both know many physicians who are kind of at wit's end with, what do I do now? So this is, I think the freedom that you're talking about is very interesting to a lot of people. So you've been doing locums for a few years, it sounds like. How has that helped you as a husband, father, just, with the family aspect? Speak a little bit about that, if you would.
Oh, it's really helped out. And in a lot of ways. First of all, because I control my schedule, I won't say it's 100%, but almost all the time when the kids are off school for like a random day, or certainly for like a spring break week or something, I'm always off. So we're always able to take advantage of that. So we've actually traveled way more than I did before, because, typically once you have kids, the thing that prevents you from traveling are the kids. But now I'm able to synchronize my schedule to be off during their holiday weeks. And we use them. We go to different places, we travel around, and it's a great experience. They remember it. It means a lot to them. And also, since I pick and choose the types of jobs I want, I'm home most of the time for dinner. I often can at least see them in the morning before I go to work. And I don't work, probably more than 60% of the time. So the other 40% of the time, I'm able to be with them and take them to school. And I think that means a lot to them. But I think, the other side of that coin is, because I'm better rested. I'm a really big believer in sleep and exercise. I sleep better because I'm at home and not on call. I'm better rested because I have more time. I exercise more than I used to. And when you're rushed, you were asking about food. I was just thinking about this. If you don't have much time to eat, you're not sitting down eating a salad. You're not going to do that. You're going to eat something quick because that's all you have time for. But, now that I have more time, I'm eating healthier. So I'm in a better place for them, emotionally. I have more, I can see it. I've got more patience. Kids, they can drive you crazy sometimes. So the higher your patience level is coming into the encounter with your kids, the better. And so when you're better rested and you exercise more because you're not working too much, you're just in a better emotional, mental place to interact with them. And I think they realize that.
Absolutely. I think most people, most adults struggle with finding balance in their life. I think it's even harder many times for physicians, and that's what we're talking about specifically today. But I think all of us struggle with balance in our life, whether we're a physician or not. And I think the alternative that you've found to being, a full-time physician at a facility and going to the same job every day, and how that's freed you up to do many things that are important to you. And everybody has different definition of success, but your definition of success in life, you wanted the family aspect in addition to the financial aspect and in addition to everything else. So I really appreciate you sharing that with our listeners. So as we wrap this up, and first of all, it's gone by very quickly. Thank you for being on the show. But as we wrap this up, we ask each of our guests, the final question is, who is your hero?
Well, this is going to sound crazy, but I would say, at least in the context of this conversation, it's Tim Ferriss. And so Tim Ferriss, you may know him. He wrote The 4-Hour Workweek, and he wrote a number of other books. That book is just awesome. If you haven't read The 4-Hour Workweek, I highly recommend it. Before reading that book, as odd as it sounds, I just thought, well, I'm kind of condemned to this life of working a lot, not really being happy, and that's just the way it is, and I need to suck it up and deal with it. It was really reading that book, as odd as it sounds, this book gave me permission that I could find a lifestyle that I like. I could find a job that fit with my schedule, that I earn the right to have time to go to the gym or be with my kids or travel or do my hobbies or exercise. And I don't need to be unhappy, and I could make my schedule fit my life. Lifestyle design. He kind of coined this lifestyle design. And with the Physician Wellness Project, this is the big thing I push, is lifestyle design. So I have to credit Tim Ferriss.
That's great. That is a great book. I've read it. And as you said, for people who are trying to find balance in their life and they're trying to figure out what's important to them, it's a fantastic book. So I'm sure Tim would appreciate the shout out there.
Yeah, I don't know him, obviously, but he seems to practice what he preaches. He's always doing one thing and he's doing something else. He does what interests him. If he doesn't like it anymore, he stops. I mean, that's, if we're working, I always tell people, if we live till 90 or 100, you might be working until you're 80. Who knows? You should enjoy what you do. And you may have liked working a lot when you were 30. Maybe that's what you wanted to do, but your tastes change, your life changes, your health changes, everything changes. You need to be able to adapt to the current situation. I think he kind of, in some ways, showed us the way to do that.
I agree. And when we're 25, we think 55 is so far away.
That's the truth.
And then it sneaks up on you and your life has gone by and you don't want to live with regrets. So, Dr. Charlop, we really appreciate the time today. Thank you so much for being on Heroes of Healthcare.
Oh, thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Heroes of Healthcare. If you enjoyed today's episode, please tell a friend or leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. You can also visit us at www.heroesofhealthcarepodcast.com for more information or to listen to past episodes. Thanks again to our sponsor, Jackson & Coker Locum Tenens, providing interim physicians and advanced practice staff for over 40 years.